Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland unveils the Trudeau government's 2024 budget. Good evening and thank you for joining us. After weeks of sprinkled announcements, Ottawa has unveiled its latest federal budget, which includes just over $39 billion of net new spending over the next 6 years.
But as CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver tells us, some economists say the government missed an opportunity to pay down debt.
Ottawa promised not to grow Canada's deficit beyond $40 billion, and despite billions in new spending, today's budget delivered on that promise. The deficit this year is $39.8 billion. That's dropping to $20 billion by 2028-2029, up from $18.4 billion projected in the fall economic statement.
We're driving the kind of economic growth that will ensure every generation of Canadians can reach their full potential.
This budget is about fairness for every generation.
The Liberal government is achieving that goal by launching its new revenue generators, including tax changes this year, while many of its new programs aren't projected to start until after the election.
It's very clear when you compare with the previous budget and fall economic statement and this budget that the government doesn't think that moving towards a balanced budget is necessary. They think that is spending in areas that they think are important for Canadians.
Among the $52.9 billion in new spending, $1.5 billion over 5 years to launch pharmacare, $6.1 billion over 6 years for a new Canada disability benefit that would see payments issued starting in July 2025. And $2.5 billion for a new Canada carbon rebate for small businesses that would return fuel charge proceeds dating back to 2019 to about 600,000 businesses.
There are two ways to balance the budget, or at least to minimize the increase in the deficit. One is to increase taxes. The other would have been to reduce program expenditures in the federal government. And there was very little of that that's included.
The government has spent much of the last 2 weeks making pre-budget housing and affordability announcements. Today, more details. Ottawa intends to create student and non-market housing by offloading space in federal lands, offering $1.1 billion over 10 years to Public Services and Procurement Canada to reduce its office space by 50%. The Department of National Defence will explore redevelopment of its properties for military and civilian housing, and the government will look into redeveloping Canada Post properties as well.
I think what they're doing on land is quite smart. We have more Canada Post locations in this country than we have Tim Hortons, so that's a lot of redevelopment opportunities.
But while there were rumors of a potential wealth tax to compensate for new spending, the government instead is increasing the tax rate on capital gains from half to 2/3. A move that will impact individuals who earn gains of over $250,000, which currently affects about 0.13% of individuals. 12.6% of corporations will feel the impact.
It is a younger demographic that's being financially creamed, and so we needed to look elsewhere to figure out how to raise revenue. This government steps in that direction by saying they want to tax wealth more.
That new tax measure alone is expected to generate about $19 billion over 5 years, and that will help the government pay for some of its new promises. But some economists are concerned about the rising public debt charges, which this year is expected to cost about $54 billion. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
Turning to municipal politics now, the higher than expected price tag for work on the conservatory has been approved by City Council.
Some around the table aren't happy with the increased cost, while others argue it's a project the community values and wants to see done. The Silos Bellows reports.
The ballooning price tag for the Centennial Conservatory renewal is a growing concern for some city councillors.
You know, this is really unfortunate. A 55% overage on an estimate we received last year.
At Monday's meeting, Council approved the $7.7 million tender for the second phase of the work. That's about $2.6 million more than the initial estimates. City staff blamed the jump on increases across the board for materials and contracting services.
You can have pom-poms and understand costs at the same time.
Self-proclaimed conservatory cheerleader councillor Shelby Chung has been a champion of the project and believes the public wants council to see it through.
In my 10 years of being here, I've yet to see a project with as much community buy-in as the conservatory, not to mention the economic and environmental return that we're going to get.
I heard it loud and clear that this was a project that the community wanted. And I just remind council that this is sort of one of those legacy projects in terms of this country.
Environmental upgrades are expected to save energy costs in the long run, and new event spaces could offer additional revenue opportunities. There was a discussion about possibly re-tendering the work, though staff warned that would only increase the price tag. While moving the project forward was supported, Councillor Mark Bentz fears that more costs over initial estimates could be on the horizon.
We should all take notice here. We've got big projects that we hope to tender. The turf facility, 40 million. The police station, 80 million. And the same things could happen.
So far, the city has secured $3.7 million in outside funding for work on the Centennial Conservatory, with an application currently in for some provincial dollars to help support Phase 3 of the project. Now, if all goes well over the next few months, city staff estimate it could open to the public in spring or summer of next year. Vasilios Bellos, TBT News.
City Council also decided to save the downtown Fort William Revitalization Committee, at least for now. Staff had recommended that the committee be dissolved, but Council voted to have its work continue for one more year. The 7-member committee was formed in 2021 to provide advice to the city to improve downtown Fort William. Many argued this work is still important, with the demolition of Victoriaville scheduled to begin this year. Chair Stephen Marguerite spoke during the meeting and explained the value he believes the committee provides.
Obviously, with getting more housing built and creating more living accommodations within the downtown will happen in the short to medium term. And we feel that there, is some guidance and some impact that we, the committee, can still have. At the end of the day, we are a volunteer committee. We are a very low cost to the city. Besides our volunteer time, we understand that there is a time commitment from administration.
In 1 year, Council will take another look at whether the committee is still necessary.
The Township of Ignace hosted one final event this past weekend before residents there will have to decide whether they want to host a repository for Canada's high-level nuclear waste.
Hundreds came out on Friday and Saturday to the Northwest Nuclear Exploration event, which featured dozens of presenters. Lee Noonan has more.
Ignace hosted their Northwest Nuclear Exploration event at the Township Rec Center. Officials say more than 500 people attended over the 2 days as they prepare to cast a ballot on the question of whether to host a deep geological repository for nuclear waste.
I'm not worried about the safety of the whole deal being buried here. I'm not worried about the transportation of it here. What I am worried about is the development of Ignace. Is it going to harm us? Is it going to change us too much?
With panel discussions, a debate, and a list of 25 different exhibitors, there were opportunities to learn about many facets of the nuclear waste question.
We get most of our ideas about nuclear waste from The Simpsons, where it's green glowing goo, and that's not what nuclear waste looks like at all. It actually looks like metal around a ceramic much like your coffee mug. This does not dissolve in water. This is actually a material that, unless you're swallowing it, it's fine.
Claire Catrice is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's Director of Indigenous and Public Relations. She wants local residents to know that any plan to bury nuclear waste will have to go through their agency.
We're essentially like the nuclear police. We're the nuclear watchdog. We've got some real brainiacs working here in all areas of nuclear science, and their job is to review what this NWMO office is going to propose and go through all the science of it and just make sure that it's safe.
The Canadian Association of Nuclear Host Communities sent several representatives, including Blair Skinner, Mayor of Pinawa, Manitoba. The town was established in the 1960s as the site of a nuclear research facility, which is currently being decommissioned.
Most people want to understand how comfortable people are living in a nuclear community. Many people moved away when the site closure was announced, but other people moved in who were not in the nuclear industry and bought houses.
There were a handful of anti-nuclear exhibitors at the event and a contingent of protesters outside. They're concerned about transportation of nuclear waste through the region and the possibility of water contamination at the site.
They haven't had an independent public environmental assessment. They are going to have an impact assessment, but we feel that this is probably just going to be a quick and dirty literature review. We want us, the public, involved. We want control of the process.
Voting will be held between the 26th and the 30th to determine whether local residents are willing to host the DGR. A decision by council is expected by the end of the summer. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Local NDP member Lise Bourgeois is challenging the Ford government about a promised wage increase for early childhood educators. That promise came back in January 2024. 3 months later, Bourgeois is concerned the government isn't taking the situation seriously.
Early childhood workers are asking when they will receive the provincial minimum wage increase promised for January 2024. There's been no communication from the government about this delay. And now the Trillium is reporting that the increase won't take effect until June. Wow. This uncertainty has been incredibly difficult for workers to bear.
Now, with respect to the workers, we stand with them. It's why the government announced an over 90% increase in wages, which was opposed by members of opposite. And notwithstanding that opposition, we're going to continue to lift wages every year. What we did in this deal is deliver wage parity with school board ECEs that were making more. We've now closed that gap. We've delivered more access, increased the fees, increased the rate of wages, and we're reducing fees for Ontario families.
Local MPs Patty Hajdu and Marcus Pulowski say they'll make sure funding gets to the Thunder Bay District Social Services Board one way or another.
This comes after a dispute between the federal and provincial governments caused the agency to lose over $4 million for social housing. Jess Clement has the details.
The head of the Thunder Bay DSAB called on local MPs Patty Hajdu and Marcus Pulowski for help last week after a dispute between the federal and provincial governments left the organization scrambling to make up a loss of over $4 million in funding.
Ask Minister Fraser to continue to provide the funding to Ontario so that we can receive our portion, so while they continue hopefully to negotiate the concerns that Canada has with Ontario's plan.
Hajdu notes in order for the funding to be delivered, Ontario has to prove the affordable housing is going to get built. She says Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser has been working on a revised plan with the province, reflecting some of the challenges it's faced.
We do have a condition that they, by September, demonstrate how they're going to meet their full housing target. And I think this is what they're expecting of municipalities. So it's really no different than the kind of pressure provinces are putting on places like Thunder Bay.
If the dispute is not settled shortly, DSAB's renovations of existing housing units and other related programs could be in jeopardy. Hajdu adds that if an agreement can't be made, they'll look at alternative ways to make sure the money gets where it needs to go.
The CEO of DSAB, Mr. Bradica, has been very clear that this could have really deleterious effects on Indigenous peoples, on homeless peoples, on people that are vulnerable or living in poverty. I don't want to see that happen. Obviously, if we can't count on the province to share this responsibility of delivering this money, that will look to other mechanisms.
Pulowski says he's been reassured by the housing minister that one way or another, the $4 million will reach the DSAB soon. However, the federal government has not provided a timeline for when the funding will be provided due to the dispute.
It's hard to say because, I mean, it does seem like there's negotiations between the province and the feds. However, we're told, and this is in response to my inquiries from the ministry, that there is no scenario under which the federal government intends to change its decision to invest these funds in affordable housing in Ontario. So how quickly it's going to be, I'm not sure.
The board will have a meeting later this week to decide on how to handle the issue. Jessica Clement, TBT News.
It's National Volunteer Week. City of Thunder Bay officials recognized the importance of local volunteers yesterday with a flag raising at City Hall. The annual event is hosted by the local Association of Volunteer Administrators to commemorate the hard work done by volunteers. Speakers at the flag raising, including Mayor Ken Boschkoff, noted that Thunder Bay residents are always enthusiastic and dedicated to volunteer for events or organizations. The volunteer coordinators for the recent Ontario Winter Games were also at the event and spoke about how important the more than 800 volunteers were for the competitions.
Volunteers were a vital role in all areas, from anywhere from welcoming and greeting athletes to the actual sports going on themselves, to the cleanup, setup, everything.
It was amazing. We knew that volunteers were going to step up, and we knew that it wasn't going to be hard to find the volunteers because Thunder Bay always does step up, but it was definitely heartwarming to see that they did it. We have many volunteers that are really the cornerstone of Thunder Bay. Many events would not happen without the volunteers that we have here today. Also, the services that we have in Thunder Bay that are solely run by volunteers.
The flag will be flying at City Hall for the rest of the week.
Yeah, we saw that flag whipping around a little bit
Absolutely.
out there. It was a really good flag-raising type of day,
Yes.
Haley, because it was a little bit gusty out there. Still a nice day, but that wind was whipping around.
Yeah, absolutely. The flag was making itself known. But yes, the winds, especially more in the afternoon, were getting quite gusty. We saw winds coming in from the east in the afternoon. That was making the big impact. In the morning, it was really light in from the north. And then as we switched over, we saw gusts up to 45 kilometers an hour at points in the afternoon. And like we mentioned, today was a nice day. I mean, compared to yesterday's high of 16, it may seem a little lackluster, but we are actually right on the average for this time of year, because the average high is 9 degrees, and that's what we hit as our high today. We actually hit it twice, once at noon and once at 2 o'clock. And then our average low for this time of year is -3, and we hit that today at 7 a.m. So a very average day all around if you didn't account for that wind. And as far as the sky conditions, we saw partly to mostly cloudy skies. Now, for across the region, currently we're still seeing some high temperatures on the west side, especially in Kenora. They saw a little bit of light rain in their morning hours, but that cleared up over the afternoon, and they're now at 13 degrees. Red Lake is seeing mostly cloudy skies. They're at 11 right now, and Fort Frances is at 11 as well, but a little less cloud coverage there. And over throughout this pocket of the region, we saw quite a bit consistency, highs ranging between 10 and 9 degrees. We see 9 in Atikokan and Uppsala, and conditions were fairly similar as well. Easterly winds making things a little gusty, and partly to mainly cloudy skies. Now, our colder areas were Armstrong and Greenstone today, but they saw the sunniest skies. So a little less wind and a little more sun, but a little colder temperatures. And then as we move over to the east side of the region and more south, we see even warmer temperatures. Sault Ste. Marie 13 right now, but they were actually 7 degrees higher than their average temperature for this time of year. And winds were more from the south, so they weren't getting those eastern gusts. And then winds were actually very tame in Marathon and Wawa today, 10 in Marathon right now and 11 in Wawa. Now as for Thunder Bay tonight, things will drop down to 1 degree and we'll have mainly cloudy skies once again. But what's really interesting is the periods of rain that are coming in. So we're looking at about 5 millimeters accumulating overnight tonight, with those winds from the east still continuing. But Environment Canada actually just released a weather statement saying that we are going to get significant amounts of rain over the next 2 days. So I'll have all the details on what that's going to look like a little later.
Okay, thanks a lot, Haley. All right, after the break, we'll turn our attention to international news. There's still concern about how Israel will react to that drone strike from Iran over the weekend. There are concerns about a wider regional war. We'll have that story and more when your news hour continues after the break.
For years, Israel and Iran have exchanged blows in the shadows, but this is no longer a proxy war.